Hi, my name's Barb Steele. Welcome to Plant Speak. This is the second Tuesday of the week, I believe, and I was asked to do this a while back. Since I live in an old house in Pennsylvania, just over the Maryland Pennsylvania border. I've always been interested in plants and history, and I certainly have that here at the house. I did a study for the township to be on the historical house list, and while I did that, I found out interesting facts about the creek here. It's called Alloway Creek. That's what they call it now. And some people think it was from the Scotch-Irish Alloway that's in Scotland. But the early maps show that the creek was called Alloway. It was a Native American word, and it meant tail of the black fox. I kind of like that since we do have a lot of native plants here in the garden, and particularly since I took hikes around the properties in various times, and a student of mine, when I taught art, found this beautiful arrowhead down on the creek lying on the rock. At a later time, I found this, I understand it's a spearhead, it's a little bit more primitive. I found that in a cornfield, and after I found it, a giant buck came out of the woods and stood and looked at me. Kind of felt like it was a sign, but this has led to a lot of interesting information about this location and this house. It was built in 1859 by a German, Mr. Straley. He had the property was in the family from the late 1700s, and he lived in a log house further out the road. It's sandstone, and it was here during the Battle of Gettysburg. Today I want to talk kind of about the plants that we have here. We were a garden center for 38 years. We sold herbs, perennials, native plants, and some small shrubs and trees. We'll take a walk out here now and look at some of the native plants in the dooryard garden that's by one of the buildings on the property attached to the house. Okay, here we are in the dooryard garden. It's based on a 4-square design. There's 4 individual squares. That's an old medieval, way back when design that was used by a lot of different groups. And then the outrider beds are over on both sides here. They could have been put around the 4-square, but we had this little spot, and we decided this would be a good place to put this. I want to talk about, first of all, the biggest plants in the garden, the trees. The tree over here is the serviceberry. It's very pretty in the spring with white flowers. And then it gets this nice edible, dark black, purple almost, berry. The birds love it. It's very edible. And the Native Americans used it. They actually ground it up and put it in with animal fat, like deer fat, to make like energy bars for long treks, hunting trips. So it was around, and it's found, you find it in the woods around here. I find it by the creek. It's a very pretty tree. You should never park your car under it because the berries are very tasty to the birds. But that's the serviceberry, sometimes called sarvisberry. This tree over here is another old one. They're both getting some age on them, and it's called the redbud tree. You will see this in the spring. It has beautiful heart-shaped leaves, and you will see this in the spring with gorgeous rose pink flowers. All along, it grows in rocky areas. It grows all along the East Coast. There's various different kinds of redbud, but this one is the one that you'll commonly see around here. And again, it was used by the Native Americans. They made teas from the inner bark for coughs, fevers, So it had medicinal uses. It's a very pretty tree and it's used in a lot of backyards. Most these trees don't get that large. They probably are about 20, 25-foot trees. So, you know, there's something to consider for your backyard, and they've got a lot of history, and they go back to the native peoples that lived here first along the creek. Some of the other plants that I wanted to show you, one of them, I don't have it planted in here yet, but it is the Monarda fistulosa, also known as wild bergamot. And it's a very, very pretty bloom to it. It's a great plant for hummingbirds like the red variety. This one's used a lot for teas, and it was used by the Native Americans also. I'm going to sit this down here and talk about another tea herb called mountain mint. It was, it's pycnanthemum, big long word. This is pilosum, which has the narrow leaves. It grows all along the mountains and in the edge of the woods. This is Pycnanthemum pilosum, and then I have one over there called Pycnanthemum muticum, big long word, but it's also called blunt mountain mint, that one over there. They also were used for teas. They have a peppermint, spearmint flavor, and they were used medicinally, and they would have been around in the wild. A lot of people now are cultivating them in their garden. Here's another plant here in the big pot. Can you see that? It's called equisetum, equa meaning horse. It's also called horsetail. And if the Pennsylvania Germans love to use it, they called it scourgrass. You could take clusters of this plant here and scour out the cast iron pots that they used. You never want to plant it in the garden. I learned the hard way. I'm still trying to get some out that I actually shouldn't have put where I put it. But it's a great plant to keep in a container. It will grow in wetlands. People put it in containers by ponds, and it's kind of a very unusual plant. It's leafless, and it goes back to the age of the dinosaurs. I mean, it goes way, way back. It's one of those early, early plants that have been around for a long time. Over here, I have to leave this. This is not a native plant, but it's called mullein, and I kind of let one come up in my garden in memory of my grandfather, who I was told used it to make poultices for his work horses when the harness rubbed them. It goes back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. They used the tapers, dipped them in fat, and used them for torches. But it's also a very good medicinal herb. It's used for earaches. They make oils for it, and they also dry the leaves for respiratory problems. It's very fuzzy, and it likes, as you can see, it's growing in a very dry place. It doesn't like to be in too rich of soil. It will grow around, it likes this drought. Any plant that has hair on the leaves, it's a good indicator that it wants to grow in a hot, dry, kind of sunny location. Great drought plant. This one here has kind of done its thing this morning. It was gorgeous. This is the Tina's Evening Primrose. We used to have primrose parties. It's not really like a primrose, it's a nethera, Glazovikiana. And these are all buds on the top that they will open. A couple of these bigger buds will open every night around 7 o'clock. And then they wilt. They're just a one-day thing, but they're big, beautiful yellow flowers. And people love to watch them and kind of decide which bloom or which bud is going to open first. You can have a primrose party with these plants. The large shrub in the back is a fig, and we're hoping we get some figs from it this year. But it's a very interesting plant to watch when it does finally put out the little figs on it. So we've got our fingers crossed. that's it. We'll go on now. We're going to go up and look at some other plants up here. Here we are in front of the old summer kitchen that was attached to the house, and an important place for cooking in the summertime, keeping the heat out of the house, and processing lots of vegetables and herbs that they grew in the gardens out beyond the house. I wanted to show you some that the Germans, the original people that built this house, were German, and they probably grew some of these plants in their garden. This one in particular is called winter savory, and it's a perennial, which means it comes back every year. It's been in this pot for several years. And then one in front, the small pot in the front, is summer savory. Usually I put it directly in the ground. It's an annual and that's it, but it's a much more tender plant. This one I use sprigs of, particularly if I'm cooking green beans. The Germans called it the bean herb. The word was Bohnenkraut. And we kind of laughed about calling it the herbal beano because it was also used as a tea for indigestion and gas. So it's an herb that you don't see much use of, but it's one of my very, very favorites because I love green beans and legumes too. It's very good with that. In front of me is a little pot that has, this is the regular sage, Salvia officinalis. This is a little fancier one. I don't think they would have had that, but it's nice for containers. It's called tricolor sage, and both can be used for culinary uses. There's a lot of salvias. This is the regular gray one called Salvia officinalis. There's a lot of salvias that are grown for flowers, but when they say officinalis, it meant of the apothecary. So it was used not only for culinary, but it was used for medicinal use. Sage was used by the Germans and the settlers here to make teas for sore throats in particular, fevers. It was a good all-round herb to have in the garden, and probably they had it here in their garden. This is a variegated lemon thyme back here, and I don't think they would have had the variegated one, but they might have had regular English thyme, which is all green and was great in soups and stews. It's a good ingredient to use. And of course, they grew parsley, and there was an interesting German superstition. They were kind of superstitious people, and they practiced things like powwowing, and I have a book called The Long Lost Friend that has all kinds of receipts to make bad evil go away. But anyway, parsley, you never brought a pot of parsley in the house. It would foretell someone's demise, that they were going to die. So parsley was planted outside in the garden. It is a biennial, which confuses people. A biennial is the plant that comes back the second year and goes to seed. Second year it gets really kind of bitter, so it's always good to have another one there. This is your flat leaf Italian parsley, we call it, and I like this one a lot for culinary. It's easy to cut up and use in salads. And this curly one over here is used a lot for garnishing. It goes back to Roman times, and the Romans always said, I mean in early manuscripts, that it was good as a breath freshener. It's high in vitamin C and vitamin A. You chew it up after, if it's on top of your baked potato, chew it up and eat it. It's good for you. So parsley will be in the German garden, and it also will be in our gardens every day now. This is a plant that I just found at a Amish greenhouse close by that I used to have in my garden, and I lost it. It's called fernleaf tansy, and it's not edible. I've seen recipes for it, but I don't think I would eat it. It comes in a flat leaf variety. The fernleaf, though, is really pretty, grows well in flower beds, and it keeps out all kinds of bugs. People cut the tansy leaves and put them in their kitchen cupboards and where their beans are and pastas, and it gives off a fragrance that the different kinds of bugs don't like. I like this because it was given to me by a friend who's no longer around, and I lost it. but it was given to me by a neighbor here. And so I was so happy to find it again. And it's in my garden now planted. That's the German herbs here. We're going to move on to the English. Here's the all English lavender. It's in a pot. It's hard to grow a lavender in a pot. I've got a lot of sand and perlite in here to kind of aerate the roots. It's a plant, again, it's one of those gray herbs that like sun. You can even mulch them with sand to reflect the light up underneath of them. But this one has bloomed faithfully in this pot for many years, and I keep saying I promise I'm going to put you in the garden one of these days, but here it is by the door. The English lavender got probably brought to England by the Romans when they came across the wall there, and a lot of the plants that we hear that made it to England came from the Mediterranean. Another Mediterranean plant that I find it amusing, I have an interesting tale to tell about rosemary. Years ago when I was involved with Silver and Arboretum in Baltimore City, Market Day, we had a lady that came up quite perplexed because her rosemary didn't taste right. And we found out, she brought us a sample, and what she brought us was a lavender. But you can cook with lavender. There's lots of recipes out there for lavender, but it's not quite the same taste as rosemary. Rosemary has more of a pine oil. It's used as a disinfectant. It's an ancient plant that's been around. This is the prostrate rosemary. It grows down, and it's good in a hanging basket or a container. This is a new one for me down here. This is called barbecue rosemary, and it's somebody, I don't know, hybridized it, how they got it, but it's supposed to be good when you're grilling, to lay it on top of meats and all. And this is another rosemary that we've tried. We've had it for many years from an herbalist from Texas. It was named for the town Arp, Texas, and they found that it was hardy. They had variable cold weather, hot weather. We have grown it here in the garden, and it does come back. And again, if you notice the foliage on this plant, this Arp rosemary, it's much grayer than the foliage on this rosemary, the barbecue rosemary. There's a lot of varieties out there, but they're fun to grow and they're great to cook with. We put them in an Italian herb blend. Rosemary was used a lot in Italian cooking also. But it would be a plant that would be found in England. Again, those Romans came across and brought their plants with them. This is a small pot of English lavender, and being in the pot and grown in a greenhouse, the leaves have gotten much larger than what they normally appear to be. I'm going to move over here to the last plant that I consider English. It was brought, probably it's a Victorian herb. It's a whole group of plants called scented geraniums. Scented geraniums were grown for their leaves and their fragrance. This one is a new one that I have. I don't even remember what the name was. I bought it because it had a pretty flower, and it smells okay, but none of them beat the smell of the rose geranium. This is a small cutting here, and there's a little bit larger one here. Here's the flower on it. It's not a big showy flower like your regular garden variety geranium. Back to the Pennsylvania Germans, they love red, the color red, and they love a geranium in the front porch. And usually it was a red geranium. This is a more coral color. But these are all scented geraniums. The English brought them from South Africa. And turn of the century they became one of the plants that they really adored. And they found that you could cook with this plant here. I will have recipes that you'll be able to find online for rose geranium jelly. And I have an interesting tale about rose geranium jelly. When I was learning about herbs, I found a recipe and I had a plant and I used the leaves and I made this jelly with apple jelly base. and it was delightful. You spread it on crackers or bread with cream cheese, and it's just an interesting flavor. And I gave a jar to my mother, who looked at me like she saw a ghost and said, "How did you know to do that?" And I said, "Well, I just found it in the book, you know." And then she looked at me and said, "Your grandmother always made roast geranium jelly." So again, things pass on and they become fashionable every so many years. And this is one that we've really enjoyed having here. And if you rub the leaves, you can't smell it, but I can. It has a delightful rose fragrance. A lot of people use the leaves in potpourri, and there is oil of rose geranium that you can buy that's not quite as expensive as rose oil. Rose oil, I remember the last time I looked, and it was a long time ago, it was kind of very, very pricey, thousands of dollars for a quart of it. But the rose geranium oil, the essential oil, is a wonderful oil to use in making potpourris and air freshness. That's about it with the English herbs. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about a little art project that I thought you would have a good time doing this week. Here we are at our final project. I know that there's a lot of talented people in this class watching, and I have a little proposition for you. I would like you to do a green man or a green woman in any media. It can be a pencil drawing, it can be charcoals, pastels. This one I did in a class at Common Ground, painting a day, and we had a self-portrait class, and I gave everyone, and you'll see that in the offering, a proportion chart. It's very simple, so you know where to put the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, and you start with that in the middle. And I wanted you to turn it into a green being. The green man, green beings, were pre-Christian, pagan. You'll see them in gargoyles now, in you know, ancient Gothic churches. They're really fun to do, to look at, and usually they had leaves and ferns and all coming out of their ears and all around their heads and bodies. This one was supposed to be me, self-portrait, and it was done in acrylics, real fast drying paint. And then what I did was take some leaves, paint the leaves, and press them on the canvas. Here's some leaves like you could use. This is an ostrich fern, and you paint it, and you could put it all around, all here. This one is a flat leaf tansy, same idea. You can go out in the garden and find all kinds of leaves. Even those little heart leaves that come from the redbud might be good to use. After I did this, I have a friend with an herb magazine. It's all digital now, so this was done when it was actually in paper copy. And I really like what they did when they printed it. They enhanced certain colors, and I thought, I want to go back and get rid of some of this bright yellow. So I would like all of you to kind of do a little green man, green woman, green person. And when we have our Friday Zoom meeting, everybody show and tell. We'll see what you do. Thanks for coming today. Goodbye.